At this point, we have installed Devise and we've gotten it set up so it's ready to go. We just need to basically add users into our application. It doesn't know what we want to call them yet, so that's the next step that we have to do. And we're going to end up running this command, Rails generate devise, and replace the word model with the name of what we want to use. Now, this is our first time talking about models and working with models. A model in a Rails application, it's basically anything in our database. It's a user, that's a model. It is a tweet, that's a model. It is a post or a story or something like that. Anything that gets saved in our database that has things attached to it. Now, that's a very abstract concept, so it's hard to really know exactly what it means and where a model ends and where a model begins. So as we use it and explore it more and more, it should make more sense. But essentially what we're doing is we're letting people do stuff that then gets saved into our database for the first time. So the thing that we need to do now for actually creating our user is run the following command. And before you run it and hit enter, make sure that you're copying it exactly the same way that I am. Rails generate devise user. So unlike the other devise command, there was a colon in that. There's no colon between devise and user here. This is also user in the singular, not user with an S at the end or anything like that. This is going to tell our app what we should be calling these things. And that's as opposed to something like admin user or people or something like really all sorts of other things that Devise could let you call them. And what this will do is set up a few things for us. Like I mentioned, it actually creates a model for us. So for the first time ever, we actually, if we go into our app models, we have something in here called user. And it doesn't have much information in it. We'll get back to this later. We also have application record, but that's empty. This is actually a new Rails 5 thing if you've used Rails before. There's concerns. We're not going to get to those during this class, but we now have a model. We also have the first line. This is called a database migration. Inside our DB file, there's a folder, there's a folder called migrate, and in it, if you click on it, this is a Ruby file that gets created that you'll need to run. And when you run it, it makes a change to your database. The database is always separate from your Rails application in the sense that it's an app. In our case, it was SQLite 3 on our computer. On Heroku, it's going to be Postgres. Those are basically relational databases is what they're called. And they use a language called SQL. But what these migrations allow you to do is write Ruby code that does something in your database. In this case, it's going to make a change to your database, and it's going to create a table called users. And then when you do a to in Ruby, it opens up what's called a block. And that's what's everything tabbed inside of here. And then this t is actually this kind of the variable nickname for this table. So inside of the block, it's going to basically create a users table. And the users table will have a string for email. So the users table has an email value. By default, it'll be empty. The users table will have a string called encrypted password. That means when a user creates a password, it'll get saved as an encrypted password. I'll have a reset password token and a time when that was sent, remember created at, sign in count, current signed in at, last signed in at, a bunch of information about our users. This stuff is actually commented out by default, so it's not going to be actually doing it. It's going to add timestamps and a whole bunch of other stuff. This is a very complicated migration, so it's not something that you're going to really understand. We'll be creating our own migrations later, but they'll be much simpler. But just know that this exists so far as a migration. We'll actually have to run it in a second so that it goes into our database. But what else gets created? Some test files. And something got added to our routes, interestingly. So let's see what got added to our route if you open config routes.rb. So now we have a devise for users line in our route. Okay, well, we've kind of gone over the changes. The last thing that you still have to do is actually, we'll run our migration now, which if you actually go and read through this, it'll tell you how to do that. we read through this copy, and then it says then run this. This command is a little updated in Rails 5. This will still work actually, but in Rails 5 you just have to run Rails db:/migrate. And what this command does is it goes through your config, it goes through your db folder into your migrations, and it runs any of these files that haven't been run yet. It actually knows how to remember which ones have run yet and which ones haven't, and it runs the ones that haven't been run yet. That way you don't end up with many tables with the same name. So let's run this and see what happens. And it tells us what happened. We created a table, users, we added an index. An index just allows you to use a certain field to look up users much faster. So that'll actually let us use the email to look up a user, and it even sets unique true, meaning users can't have multiple emails or the same email for multiple users. And reset password token and etc. Like I mentioned, Rails remembers which migrations you've ran. So if I hit the up key to go back here and run it again, it should actually say nothing. It should say, all the migrations have run, so it's already been done. Now, if you ever want to undo a migration, it's actually quite easy. You can do Rails database db rollback, and that will undo it. I can show you right now. This is going to undo basically what I just created. So it removes the index, and drops the table, so we're back to normal. And then I can do this again, Rails db migrate. So if you're ever worried that you did something wrong, you can always roll back. This is, if you accidentally ran the generator with the wrong name and your migration has the wrong name, you do this and you go back. So I just undid it and then I redid it again. And let's actually run the Rails application and see what got changed. Let's do that in the next video.